Hi everyone, Shane R. Monroe here. Before we get started, let's talk about what an EmuDeck install actually is. When you installed EmuDeck, a lot of stuff went to internal storage, no matter what you chose. Emulators, configuration files, some of your save files, and the emulation folder could optionally be there. ROMs, BIOS files, scrape media, some of your save files. During the install, you may have elected, say, your micro SD card, and that's where the emulation folder was created. But there's one thing you gotta know. The path to emulation is hard-coded everywhere. Everywhere. Your Steam launchers, ESDE, everything. So we use EmuVirtual to let us point to wherever we want, whenever we want. Thanks to using the EmuVirtual symlink, it doesn't matter where your emulation folder is. It can be wherever you want it to be. All you have to do is repoint the EmuVirtual folder to where you want it to be. Alright, so now you know why we want EmuVirtual. Let's set it up. Dolphin File Manager is where we're going to go, and it doesn't matter if you want your emulation folder on the internal storage or the home folder, or you want it on your micro SD card. Either way, we're going to make the EmuVirtual in the home folder. So if you want all of your stuff to be internal, then you're going to use the home path. If you want it to be on the SD card, you're going to use your SD card path. And this is pretty simple to do here. Essentially, we're going to right click, create new, and then we're going to create a link to a file or directory. Now, let's say you want to do it off of your SD card. Go up here and grab it. Yours is going to look different than mine. Grab that path, or grab the home/deck path, depending on where you want the bulk of your ROMs and BIOS files and everything else to be. I want mine in my SD card, so I'm going to create a new file or directory. I'm going to name it EmuVirtual, camel case, capital E, capital V, EmuVirtual, and I'm going to paste in my path. Now, this is the root of the path, so it's either going to be the root of your SD card or the root of your home folder. All right, there we go. Now we have a virtual link that actually points to, check it out, the contents are identical. All right, next up, we're going to go to the console. We're going to set your sudo password. Type in passwd. And if you already have a password, it'll say current password. You can skip this part, but you probably don't have one yet, so let's type one in. There's no echo when you type. And there we go. So now I've actually set a password. You'll want that for some things. All right, let's get to the meat of the matter here. Let's go to Brave or whatever browser you have. We're going to go to emudeck.com. Hit download. And you're going to be downloading the Steam OS version. Unless you're paying for it, you probably want to download the free version. And we're going to make sure that we save that on the desktop and that it has the .desktop extension. Some browsers may mangle that. Okay. Now we're done in the browser. That was pretty easy, right? On our desktop, we now have this icon. And if we double click it, we should see this. If you don't trust it, hit cancel. We trust it. We're going to hit continue. If you don't finish this install all the way to the end, you're going to have to keep doing it until you do. All right, we're going to show you more about that in a minute. A lot of problems with this, and I don't know why. All right, so you can choose easy or custom. I'm going to suggest custom because you want full control over the install. In our case, it doesn't matter where they think we want it, SD card or internal storage. We want to put it in a custom location, that EmuVirtual folder, because then we can control where it is at any time. So we go to Home, single click EmuVirtual, don't double click into it, and hit OK. Now remember, EmuVirtual is currently pointed to our micro SD card. All right, of course, Steam Deck is what we want. Next up, pick your level of integration. You have low, which is Emulation Station or ESDE, and you have the highest, which is Steam ROM Manager, which injects all of your games into your Steam library. I recommend low. There's lots of themes, it doesn't clutter up your library, it's fast and effective. And the highest is, of course, Steam ROM Manager, where the games are tightly integrated into the Steam library, but if you have too many of them, it can start slowing your system down. So unless you're only going to put a couple of things in there, I would definitely recommend going with ESDE. Now, of course, we get to pick our default theme. I'm a really big fan of this one right here. I use it for all these videos. We'll choose that one. And let's go ahead and select all of these other emulators. And there's a good reason why some of these are unchecked by default. But you're going to find some of these that say, do you want RetroArch or the standalone emulator, right? RetroArch has these pros, MGBA, for example, has these pros. Just say both. They're not that big. Say both for everything, right? Every one of these almost have some sort of an alternative, RetroArch or go ahead and take them both. And then what sort of optimization and configurations do you want to do? There's no reason to have any one of these unchecked. Autosaves. So when the game is exited, do you want to jump right back where you were? I'm not a fan of that. Retro achievements. This is great. You want retro achievements. If you don't already have a login and password, go get one, sign in. It's going to totally bring your emulation to life. Game bezels. You love them or you hate them. I love them. I don't want black space. I want to keep the original aspect ratio. I don't want to stretch anything. And if I'm not stretching anything, I want the black areas gone. And the gate bezels work for me. Speaking of aspect ratios, I don't want to stretch anything. I don't want to maul anything. I want it to look exactly as it did before, and it was probably on a 4:3 TV. So again, we're going to continue to click through all original aspect ratios. So we're going to stick with these original default aspect ratios. I don't want anything stretched or glitching or anything. I don't mind the black bars as long as it's how the original was. All right, whether you like shaders or not, that's up to you. I don't like anything that might take away performance from my emulation, so I leave shaders off. Again, your call here. Shaders on, shaders off. Your call. And once again, okay, so do you want your button layouts to be by letter or by position? This really only matters if you're playing Switch stuff. So, and here we go. Here are all the things it's going to install. Here's all the things it's going to configure. And here's all of your specialized customizations. And don't worry about these default resolutions. They can be changed if you need them to be higher later. Awesome, we're ready to roll. Now, it used to hang during this install twice because of some hidden pop-up. That's not here anymore. Thank you for fixing that, devs. All right, so once it's done installing, you're going to land here. Automatic import or manual copy. You don't have to use an external drive. You don't have to use an external flash card. You don't have to do anything that anybody tells you have to do. Any way you can get the files over, that be SneakerNet, saves, whatever. Doesn't have to be a hard drive or anything, just however you want to get them over. Now you see here, EmuVirtual, right? It opened that for us, and there's the emulation folder where all your goodies are, BIOS, ROMs, all that stuff. All right, so it just so happens I do have an external hard drive that has backups of all of my stuff. If you ever want to double check the location of EmuVirtual, select EmuVirtual and Properties and check it out right here. And you can see exactly where it points to. If for some reason we just bought a 2 terabyte internal storage and we wanted to move that over, we could do it by simply changing where this link points to. I could drag this emulation folder over internally and move it there, and then simply update the EmuVirtual sim link to point to it. Believe me, if you're going to ever upgrade your SD card, if you're ever going to move this thing, EmuVirtual's the way to go. So now you know where to copy your games. So now it's saying go copy stuff. I think people bail right here. Don't. And since we chose low or ESDE integration into our Steam library, essentially ESDE becomes just another launcher or another game inside of your Steam library. Here's the emulator hotkeys that you might be interested in knowing about. And that's it. Here's how you know you're done. There he is. You see that little blue Yoshi right there? Until you see the blue Yoshi, you're not done. And if you leave before this, you will constantly be in an install loop over and over again. But don't do anything yet. Close it first and bring it back up. And I tell you this because there's a chance that a hotfix will be pushed that didn't come down with the initial build. You want to make sure there's no hotfixes or any changes. Now that we've restarted it, we can now see no longer does it say manage emulators needs attention because it's all good. Yes, I know. What about those guys? We're going to get to those guys later. All right, everything looks pretty good here. It looks as you would expect. Now, again, if something went wrong, you might close out of this and try to go back in, and you're going to get into that install loop. Our first stop is probably going to be the BIOS checker. Now, we don't have any BIOS files, right? We don't have anything for PS1, PS2. All of these things we don't have BIOS files for, which means we can't emulate games for those platforms. Other platforms have either built-in or pretend BIOS files to get us by, but in this case, we don't have any of these. So none of these are going to play, none of them, until we fix that problem. Now, real quick, I wanted to show you how to get to Emulation Station DE if you're still on the broken build. Now, if you go in here and I look and you search for ESDE or Emulation Station or whatever, you're not going to find it because it's broken in this build. Now, if you happen to see it, you're done. You can jump ahead a little bit. But for those who are still stuck in this version, let me show you how to get it in there. Hit the application launcher or the start menu button, find ESDE, right-click and add to Steam. This is sort of a ghetto manual workaround way of doing it, but it does indeed work, and it will inject the launcher into your Steam library. So now that we search for it, you will indeed see it, but it won't have a bunch of cool graphics or anything because we sort of did a manual install. But it is there and it works. Okay, so we run Emulation Station DE. We don't really have anything in here. Now, it says that there's Xbox stuff in here, but there's not. There just happens to be a folder in there that trips the front end into thinking that there might be games in there, but there's not. All right, so we need to get some ROM images. We need to get some BIOS files. So it's time for us to do that. If you go inside that emulation folder, you'll see there's a BIOS folder and a ROMs folder. This is where these files are obviously going to go. We're going to start off in the BIOS folder. You can see there's a ton of folders in here that look like that's where you're supposed to put stuff, but only on rare occasions do you actually have to put something in there. Everything usually goes on the root. ROMs, on the other hand, each have their own platform, and sometimes the platform names are kind of confusing. There's like a GC, which you think would be GameCube, but there's also a GameCube one. It can be a little bit confusing, but in this case, let's say that we wanted to put something in the PSP folder. Well, there's really only one, right? So you go in there and this is where you'll put your ROM files. Now I'm going to plug in my 2 terabyte external hard drive on my dock to give me access to all my BIOS files and all my ROM images. I'm going to set this up in a split screen. Again, you do not have to have an external drive. You can get these things wherever you want. I have an external drive that has all of this stuff already on it. So I'm going to plug it in. I'm going to mount it. And here's where I have all of my stuff ready for backup. Here's my EmuDeck folder. I'm going to go to BIOS and my backup. And here I've got copies of everything here. I've got every BIOS I could possibly lay my hands on are in here. Now, again, these folders don't mean anything. All right, so I do know that the SCPHs are all Sony PlayStation files. So there's probably PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, Japanese, American, European, and they're not named very well. They do have to be named properly. They have to be also in the proper case. So capital S is not the same as little s. Now we're going to run EmuDeck again, and we're going to check out that BIOS checker and see how I did. Hey, PS1 and PS2 are ready to play. Perfect. Now, obviously, we would have to repeat the process for the game BIOS files that we need, but that's really all there is to it. Copy them into the root folder. Now, let's go to my ROMs. Again, I'm going to go to my hard drive, my backup drive on the left, and I'm going to go to my EmuDeck on the right. And I will go to PSX, which is actually PlayStation 1. And I'll go to my backup here, find some PlayStation action. Okay, here we go. Now you're going to see, I'm going to copy over Super Puzzle Fighter, which is a bin-Q format. You may have some of these laying around. But you might also see that some of mine are also in something called the CHD format. So bin-Qs and CHDs, there's a difference between them, and I'm going to show you what those are. But for now, I just want to show you what it looks like if you copy a bin-Q over. Now that we've copied over our BIOS files and we have at least one ROM to use, we're now ready to go back into Emulation Station Desktop Edition. And look at that, there's a PlayStation now. Woohoo! Into PlayStation, we have two. Well, one of them's a Q file, which is a legal file type, and one of them's a bin file, which is also a legal file type, so they listed it twice. Now, you could probably launch either one of them, but you want to launch the Q, but you can't see the Q. It's very complicated. You don't want to be using bin Qs anyway. We're going to get rid of that in a minute, but I did want you to see that it does launch, and it does actually go through the PlayStation official BIOS right at the front. Okay, it works. I cut out all the audio, don't worry. All right, so it's hard in desktop mode to kind of get out of stuff. I'm gonna just try to close it manually. A little bit messy here, but I recommend doing all of your emulation in gaming mode. It's cleaner, there's not these weird pop-ups, it's not nearly as confusing, but we're already on the desktop for various reasons like using the file manager. So now, how do we get those bin queues into the CHD single file format? Well, good news is it's built right in, EmuDeck compressor. Now, read these things, would you? Just read these things and see what they're for, right? So CHD is a compressed hard drive file. It does all sorts of ISOs, types, and bin queues and everything. All right, so before we do the compression, I want to also put some Game Boy Advance games over here, some GBA games. So once again, I'm going to go to my external hard drive that I got plugged in where my backups are, go to my ROMs, find my GBA games, and you'll see that they're all in the .gba format. Go to my ROMs here on my SD card, go to GBA, and I'm just going to copy a handful of these over. All right, very, very fast, very, very small files, easy peasy. So now we're going to go back and do our compression. I wanted to have both a standard file as well as a disk image. Okay, so we can do bulk compression, bulk decompression, or just do one. We want to do it all. We're going to do a big bulk compression, and it already knows we have something that can be converted in GBA and PSX. We'll select them both. Now, what it's going to do is convert those two bin.q files into a single CHD file. Then it will only show up once on the list, which is what we want. So if I jump back into, now you see here, look at this. bin.q and CHD, because the CHD is being written to, and once the CHD is completed, it will delete the bin.q for us. You're also going to see it's exceptionally smaller. Look at the different file sizes here. It was 5 and change, now it's 3 and change. We love it. More space for your stuff, single file. That's what we want. Now let's go look at our Game Boy Advance games. They're all now .7 or 7 zip. That's both good and bad. We're going to talk about this in a minute. You guys need to know about this stuff. Now, before we go and check the work that we've done in Emulation Station DE, I want to show you one more thing. All this BIOS and ROMs and everything might get you down if you have some struggles with it. Let me show you a way to get playing right now. Go to the EmuDeck store. These are homebrew games for Game Gear, Genesis, Sega Master System, or Mega Drive, Super Nintendo. You can then find a game that you would like to play. Now listen, these aren't commercial games, of course, they're homebrew. But at least being able to get something working easily, just to keep yourself at wit's end, sometimes this is great. So we've now installed that homebrew game. Now we can see said homebrew game when we go to the Emulation Station DE. Now remember, we should have PlayStation, we should have Game Boy Advance, and we should have Super Nintendo. Well, there we go. See, look at that. Super Puzzle Fighter is now a single file. And if we go to Game Boy, it still recognizes the files even though they're .7z. Now inside of here, there's a homebrew folder. Hey, that's the game that we downloaded. And guess what? No BIOS nonsense, no copy this, copy that. It was just delivered for you and you can immediately start playing something. That could be valuable to some folks. You can exit by holding the menu in view, aka start and select. And then if you hit the start button, you can bring up the menu and you can exit cleanly. Well, that was fun. We've got a lot done here, but we still have some more work to do. So let's go to Steam ROM Manager. I showed you how to run it through Emulation Station DE. Now I'm going to show you how to do it in Steam ROM Manager at great protest. So we're going to shut off all parsers because we don't want to parse everything, just what we want to parse. Now, we have a PlayStation game, right? Super Puzzle Fighter. So we go down looking for PlayStation, and what the hell? There's 3 of them. PlayStation Duck Station, PlayStation Beetle, PlayStation Swan Station. What do we choose? Well, you'll learn over time which emulators that you like, and so we're going to use Duck Station for PlayStation. But you can see how this can kind of get confusing if you don't know your way around the emulation world, right? That's why I really don't like Steam ROM Manager. And again, we can choose what artwork we want. Yeah, and if you start to inject too many games, your interface is going to suffer. These are very easy to break, these launchers from Steam. And yeah, they're kind of hard to get rid of too. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of reasons why I'm not a big Steam ROM Manager. But we inject it into Steam. There we go. Now it's done injecting the entries. And we're ready to go back and take a look. So we go to Steam, go to Library, and there's a new category. Now, if you're like me and have like 10,000 games in your Steam library, it can get a little bit messy. I would start collapsing categories until you see, oh, look, there's the Sony PlayStation category, and inside of there it is. And if you ran it from here, it would work just fine. Now, for me, I really like to put these into Steam if I need a custom configuration, because you can do a per game configuration that way for your controller. 99 times out of 100, every Sony game plays with the same controller configuration. So you really don't need to do that. But just letting you know that there are reasons why you might want to inject it into Steam. And of course, you can always get rid of them one at a time by deleting them manually. See this? This is all hard-coded. So if this was all hard-coded, not only the launcher, but the ROM file, all of this was hard-coded and pointing to your SD or your internal, and you tried to move everything over to another location without using EmuVirtual, all of your Steam Deck things would break. Take a look at this. So not only is the launcher tool have the control path in it, but also the ROM, right? So essentially, let's say you had 200 of these injected, you moved your location without using EmuVirtual, you'd have to go and inject all of them again. All right, so enough of that. Now, of course, it's very easy to get rid of this thing. You could just delete it like any other Steam game if you like. But if you end up having 500 of these things in here, well, you get a little unwieldy. All right, so we're done here. Steam ROM Manager, that can go away. And we're done with that. All right, next up, let's open up Emulation Station Desktop Edition. We're going to hop over to one of our libraries here. We're going to go to Game Boy. Now, there's a whole bunch of these, but it's kind of bland. It's just a list, right? The names are all weird. We're going to go to the Scraper. The Scraper is going to get us media that's going to make this stuff look cool, but there's some caveats. So what we're going to do is go into Scraper. You have a couple of different ones to choose from. Screen Scraper is superior, but there's a caveat. So what do we want? You want to scrape all games? No, we just want to scrape one system. We're going to scrape the Game Boy Advance. That's it. We don't want to scrape anything else. You could have like 10,000 games in here. You don't want to scrape them all. All right. So now here's a login and password, right? If you use a free account, you are very, very limited on how many scrapes per day you can get. And believe me, if you have a large library, pay the guy the $2 a month or whatever it is, get yourself an account and set it up in here. All right, so we got 5 of these. Now it searches by name and if they're zipped or unzipped completely by MD5 hash checks. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. A lot of times the way that ROMs are named is completely the opposite of what the scraper wants. You're going to see why in a minute. Well, hey, look at this. Super Puzzle Fighter Turbo was found. It's because we also scrape PlayStation games, right? All right, so one game scraped, which was the PlayStation game, and the other 4 were skipped. What the hell happened, right? So none of these got anything, but what does it look like when it does find? Look at that. You got pictures, you got videos, you've got all of this metadata. It looks great. How come the GBA didn't get any of it? Well, it's because they're named wrong. Or they're not named in a way that pattern matches with the scraper, right? That's frustrating, almost to a fault. So let's go fix one of these and I'll show you how to get around this problem. We're going to quit. We're going to go back to our GBA folder. Remember, that's in our EmuVirtual or on our SD card. Go to ROMs and we'll head over to GBA. All right, so here we go. Obviously, these numbers, the U's, the mode 7s, they're just throwing everything. Let's reduce a file name down to its core essentials. PoyoPop. That should be an easy match, am I right? Let's find out. Back into ESDE we go. And let's go over to Game Boy. Okay, there's PoyoPop. It's named right now. That's something. Now, you can scrape a single system, but I'm kind of doing this over and over again for repetition's sake, so you can kind of get a feel, and it sort of gives you a little muscle memory on how to do this. So again, I said scrape all the GBA games, and it's going to go through all 4 of them again. And it might surprise you to know that the other 3 games will not appear yet. But hey, what about PoyoPop? Show it to me. Yes, it found it. Well, because it did a name match, and the name matched perfectly. PoyoPop is PoyoPop. Easy peasy. So 1 was successfully scraped, the other 3 weren't. Now, here's something that's great about Screen Scraper versus, say, the Games DB. It can do like an MD5 or a hash check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this Super Mario World game back to being a straight up GBA title. I deleted the .7 zip. Now, I didn't name it. You see how it's all still named crazy? Right? It's still got the number and the mode 7 and all that other nonsense on it. Let's try to scrape again, shall we? There you go. See, it's still named wrong, but I'm going to scrape all the Game Boy games one more time. Game Boy Advance, sorry. And yes, it did match because the fingerprint of the file, not zipped, not 7-zipped, just all by itself, that fingerprint matched something on the database side. So it now is able to deliver us what we want. All right, let's go ahead and restore the emulators that are missing. Obviously, you have to have these files yourself. I cannot provide them to you. They have to be named exactly the way you see here. And they're going to be put in the Home Applications folder. So just copy them on over there. Once we're done, though, we do still have one more thing we need to do. This works for both the Y and the C emulator, as you can see here. Go back to EmuDeck and reset the configuration of both the C and the Y emulator. That will realign the controls, set the ROM paths, and all that other good stuff. Obviously, there's still a few things that you'll have to do to get these working, but those are the sorts of things that I cannot help you with due to legality, so you're kind of on your own. So once again, back to my external hard drive where I have all my backups. On the right-hand side, I have that platform's folder pulled up. I'm going to go to my backups, and I'm going to specifically pull a third-party, non-invasive, non-Nintendo game file and copy it over here. We won't wait for it. We'll just do it. I can't help you, folks. I can't help you find all the other stuff you need to make this work. All I can do is tell you how to get the emulator back into place, and you'll have to provide the illegal parts yourself. They're on the warpath, those guys. All right, so now we go back in, and the platform is here. Now, it's not going to run. First off, we definitely want to go back and change our emulators to point to the Y emulator instead of the R emulator. So we don't want to use that one. We want to use the Y emulator. Now let's try to run it. Now, you should know by now that it's not going to work, right? Because the illegal parts of emulation for that platform aren't here. See, there you go. You've got to fix that yourself. There's nothing I can do about it, but once you do that, everything will work fine. That's as far as I can take you. Sorry about that. Okay, next up, let's see. We've got a few things here left to do. If you go under Manage Emulators, this is where you go to fix stuff. If something doesn't work right, reset the configuration. If it still doesn't work right, reinstall it, uninstall it, and reinstall it. Typically speaking, one of those actions will fix any problem that you have. And a lot of times, if something breaks, they will release a patch on the back end that will fix it. Emulator resolution, if for some reason you're plugging into a TV or a monitor or something and you would like to change your default resolutions for these emulators, you can indeed do it right here from the EmuDeck screen. You don't have to go in and fool around with anything. It just works. Migrate your installation. If for some reason you did not use EmuVirtual and you have to move your current installation from, say, SD card to internal to SD card, whatever, you can use their migration tool. Takes a long time. A lot of wasted time. Just use EmuVirtual. EmuDecky is a plugin for Decky Loader that will give you some extra features. Right there, you will need your sudo password, which is why I had you set one up at the beginning. A lot of people like to use EmuDecky, and now you've got a sudo password ready to go. All right, we're getting kind of towards the end here. Let's see, retro achievements we sort of talked about. We talked about EmuDeck compressor. Well, let's uninstall it, right? So it's time to clean up. It's going to warn you probably not to do it. You're going to do it anyway. And then it's going to say, hey, if you want to delete all those ROM shortcuts that you've injected into Steam, you need to use Steam ROM Manager to do it. Once you've uninstalled, there's nothing you can do. So, all right, do you want it to back up your saves? Good God, say yes. Say yes, say yes, say yes, say yes. Here's why. Don't believe that your saves are safe on the SD card. They're not. Some of your saves are internal, whether you believe it or know it or not. So make a backup, make a backup. Do you need to back up your BIOS files? No, because it's not going to delete them. So just leave it alone, and I'll show you later why you don't even need to worry about that. Just say no. Finally, would you like to keep any of these for whatever reason? You may choose which ones you'd like to keep. I want out, right? I want everything gone, so it's going to stay there. All right. That says, of course, except ROMs and BIOSes. All right, so I'm going to speed that up a little bit. It takes a minute or two, and now you're done. It's gone. It is gone, gone, and gone. It's a very clean cleanup. It's a lot cleaner than it used to be. Now let's go prove a couple of things. Let's go to our SD card under the emulation. Your BIOS files are here. See, there's all my PlayStation BIOS files. They're still safe. And if I go into my ROMs folder, you'll find that my ROMs are safe. See, there's Super Puzzle Fighter. But it also nuked all of my metadata, all of my screen scrapes and everything else. I've got a whole nother video on how to back all that stuff up. Well, that's it. It's been a long journey. Thanks for staying with us. If you like what we're doing here, like, subscribe, hit the bell. You guys know what to do. I'm Shane R. Monroe. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and we'll see you next time.